The first and the last mention of the Breath of the Wild sequel was given to us almost 2 years ago. All of us had tons of hope that something will be given to us during the last Nintendo Direct. Have you felt the heart sink when Eiji Aonuma showed up on the screen?
I'm sure a lot of you saw me and thought there might be news about the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild game. Unfortunately, we don't have anything to share right now.
His words disappointed so many of us. Breath of the Wild sequel was not the major theme. The only thing we have got was the Skyward Sword coming to Switch. But why exactly that game? Hello and welcome, my name is Majora, and I am an upset Nintendo fan. The Nintendo Direct gave us lots of expectations on the new Zelda series. However, it just left us with the 10-year-old Skyward Sword, coming to our beloved console. Yet I question myself, why exactly Skyward Sword is given to anticipated fans? Why not Ocarina of Time, the most popular Zelda game, or not Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess, the most dark game in the series? I hope that I will surprise you with my ideas and theory, but for now I'll just say that we are all mad with having no information on the Breath of the Wild sequel. However, let's think. Why exactly Skyward Sword is given to us? In order to understand everything, we need to take a little step back in Zelda history. Quick facts. Skyward Sword was released in 2011 for Wii console. It has been sold pretty poorly and it had very annoying control system. Nevertheless, it's a classic Zelda game. Except two important things. Number 1, Skyward Sword is the first chapter of the whole Zelda series. Number 2, for some reason, Breath of the Wild takes a lot of inspiration from Skyward Sword. Stepping back, I need to point out that I have never played Skyward Sword and this video most definitely will lack any spoilers. Therefore, I can only mention a few main mechanic similarities between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, such as stamina circle, climbing, paragliding, but more interesting are the plot references to Skyward Sword. Breath of the Wild has gobs of them. Fi speaking to Zelda through the Master Sword, the girl named Shamai from the Woodlands table, referring to Skyloft. Spiritual spots that look identical in both games. Breath of the Wild even starts with the mentioning of Skyward Sword. The first person that we meet in the game, the old man, tells us that the Great Plateau was the birthplace of all Hyrule, basically saying that Skyward Sword took place on this very location. If looking for references, Skyward Sword is the most mentioned Zelda game in Breath of the Wild, and I think I know the reason why. As we all know, Zelda timeline is huge and complicated, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, I'll try my best to explain the basics. So let's take a look. The Zelda timeline looks like a fork that splits into 3 different sections. The whole story starts with the Skyward Sword game, follows up with the Minish Cap and the Four Swords, and then it gets to Ocarina of Time. This is where the mess starts. You see, Ocarina of Time gives us 3 different plot twist possibilities. The first one is called The Hero is Defeated. It opens the plotline where Link is falling and Ganon takes over. The other 2 sections fall under the name The Hero is Triumphant and splits into 2 directions: Child Era and Adult Era. The rest of the games fall under these 3 sections and are happened in 3 parallel universes. But Breath of the Wild is different. It doesn't apply to any of the 3 timelines. Instead, the director of the game claims that Breath of the Wild is most definitely happening after all of the games. I mean, even though the timeline splits into 3 different sections, they all end up in one point, Breath of the Wild game to be exact. Remember, there's another special to the timeline game except Breath of the Wild. The game that priors every possible timeline ever. The Skyward Sword. Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword are both dramatically important games for the whole Zelda franchise. They both frame the beautiful plot and story of Zelda, Skyward Sword in the beginning and Breath of the Wild in the end. They have so much in common. Nintendo never take their steps without a certain purpose to it. They plan everything 10 years ahead. All the similarities between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, all the references... I will dare to take a wild guess that Breath of the Wild sequel will be the last chapter in the Zelda timeline. That is why Nintendo gave us to play the Skyward Sword first. I think that the Breath of the Wild sequel will have much more references from the Skyward Sword game, and will provide a deep story that will require a player to understand the context of the full Zelda franchise. I feel that in order to realize and estimate the following Breath of the Wild sequel, we need to know how it all started by playing Skyward Sword, how the land of Hyrule was created, created, what powers lie under the Master Sword, how the evil powers were born. We even get to know the start of relationship between Link and Zelda. That doesn't mean there won't be any other Zelda games in the future. I'm 100% certain that there will be tons of them. I just want to say that most definitely future games will take place between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, somewhere here in the timeline, or in a whole new era. I know how every one of you is waiting for the Breath of the Wild sequel. Me too. However, it is a great pleasure that Nintendo want to place us in the historical context of Zelda. They really want us to analyze and enjoy the story that they will give us in the future. I mean, the sequel. And there's just no other better game that can explain the backstory of Zelda than Skyward Sword. As the first game in the timeline, Skyward Sword is the best choice to introduce the game to the new players and remind it to the old ones. I'm sure that Nintendo does that for a reason, and in this video I tried to understand the underline of it. I have no idea when the sequel to Breath of the Wild will come out, however, I have great expectations. I wonder if we even could travel to Skyloft in the sequel, go back to Origins in a way. That would be such a beautiful twist. And of course, I'm looking forward to these cute Joy-Cons. Thanks for watching, subscribe to my channel. I am Majora. Play with love.